Thank you for joining us on This Week in Turkey. I am Murat, Türsan. Tonight, Osman Kavala is sentenced to life. President Erdoğan visits Saudi Arabia and will have a former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Yaşar Yakış, to weigh in on the visit. There may be a possible rift in the opposition coalition, and we'll have the latest on the economy. Our first story tonight, businessman and philanthropist Osman Kavala and 7 others are found guilty under dubious circumstances. Osman Kavala was sentenced to life on Tuesday with no possibility of parole. Osman Kavala, once a pivotal figure inside the AKP, was a supporter of the 2013 Gezi protests, which made headlines around the world and shook the ruling government to its very core. A while after Gezi protests, Osman Kavala was arrested in 2017 and had been incarcerated without a conviction until this very Tuesday. Osman Kavala had been charged 3 different times, acquitted twice, but every time he was acquitted, prosecutors came up with fresh charges, everything from terrorism to espionage. Back in 2019, the European Human Rights Court had ruled for Kavala's immediate release, but the ruling had fallen on deaf ears. Kavala is now sentenced to life in prison for the crime of attempting to overthrow the government, for which he was acquitted in earlier cases. But despite cries from political figures in Turkey and abroad, the government did not back down, and it appears finally got its way. Of course, everyone from the political opposition to the highest levels of government in the US and Europe had always argued that this was nothing more than a kangaroo court put on by the Erdoğan government to thinly veil a facade of legitimacy on a judiciary under the government's thumb, willing to do political hits so long as ordered. And while President Erdoğan appears very happy with the verdict, he is in fact alone because the case continues to draw condemnation from the opposition and officials abroad.
Şunu bilin, hiçbir hukuka aykırı işlemi kabul etmeyeceğiz.
The Gezi Park case verdict was finally announced on Tuesday. Osman Kavala is sentenced to aggravated life imprisonment on the charge of attempting to overthrow the government, but was acquitted of the espionage charges. The court also sentenced Mücella Yapıcı, Çiğdem Mater, Ali Hakan Altınay, Mine Özer'den, Can Atalay, Tayfun Kahraman and Yiğit Ali Ekmekçi to 18 years for aiding and abetting. On the very night the decision was handed down, President Erdoğan met with higher-ups in the judiciary and stated, "Trust in the judiciary continues to go up." The opposition had a completely different tone, however. CHP chair Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu said, "Justice cannot come from manipulated courts. What is Gezi? It is the voice of this country's youth that screams for freedom. It is a rebellion against oppression." Opposition coalition partner E-Party's chair Meral Akşener's speech was the most anticipated, however, unclear where the Turkish center-right would land on Gezi. Akşener did not comment on the decision on the day, but did comment at her party's group meeting the following day. The youth of this country carried out these protests for this nation that they would willingly die for, so that Erdoğan doesn't rip up bequeath this proud nation to construction barons. They organized that protests for the future of the Turkish nation, which they love. In this respect, Gezi is not only a protest for the Turkish youth, but also a rise of national consciousness. Not all comments came from the opposition, however. AKP's Governor Funda Kocabıyak of the Uşak province was ordered to vacate her seat when her husband, a former AKP MP, released critical tweets. The Kavala decision also garnered wide condemnation on the world stage. US State Department spokesperson Ned Price and German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock once again called for Kavala's immediate release. EU Foreign Affairs High Representative Joseph Borrell tweeted, "The Turkish court's life sentence for Osman Kavala, together with heavy prison sentences for other defendants, show maximum harshness. They ignore the decision of the European Court for Human Rights. Respecting fundamental rights and freedoms is today more important than ever."
Our main story tonight, Turkey's new era in regional geopolitics. President Erdoğan arrived in Saudi Arabia yesterday and finally met with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and King Salman bin Abdulaziz. President Erdoğan had been trying to repair relations with the regional states since the end of last year. So far, Turkey has been making attempts at repairing relations with Israel, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. Though Egypt has not been very receptive to Turkey so far, one of the last ones on that list was Saudi Arabia. Turkish-Saudi relations had been nearly non-existent and sometimes downright hostile for the last decade, stemming from both nations finding themselves on the opposite sides of the Arab Spring. In 2014, Saudi Arabia even kept Turkey from attaining a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. In 2017, in the Qatar diplomatic crisis, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Egypt severed diplomatic ties with Qatar for its military cooperation with Turkey. In 2018, of course, Saudi citizen and journalist Jamal Khashoggi was murdered in the Saudi embassy in Istanbul, and sound recordings of the brutal homicide was leaked to the media soon thereafter, leading many to conclude that Turkish intelligence had bugged the embassy. The Khashoggi case had been a thorn on Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's side for a long time. Well, exactly 22 days ago, Turkey finally closed the Jamal Khashoggi case and transferred it over to Saudi Arabia. At the time, it looked like the Khashoggi case was a prerequisite for Turkey to restart the mending of relations with the kingdom. And now it looks like that's been settled. Turkey and Saudi Arabia might be turning a new leaf after all. We'll have former Foreign Minister Yaşar Yakış in just a little bit to tell us what all of this means. But let's get the details first.
President Erdoğan visited Saudi Arabia weeks after the Jamal Khashoggi murder case was closed by the Turkish courts and transferred to Saudi Arabia. President Erdoğan landed in Saudi Arabia last night and met with Saudi King Salman bin Abdulaziz and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. According to reporting by the Saudi state press agency, the leaders discussed how they could repair and expand the relations between the two nations. President Erdoğan brought along his full cabinet for the meeting, from Defense Minister Akar to Treasury Minister Nurettin Nebati, appointed 5 months ago. Minister Nebati posted on Twitter that he met with his Saudi counterpart and spoke about furthering trade and economic cooperation. As the relations had begun to thaw between the two states, Saudi Arabia had begun removing the unofficial economic blockade against Turkey. According to the Turkish Statistical Institute, trade between both states is up 25% in the first quarter of 2022.
Joining me now to make sense of it all, former Foreign Minister, Mr. Yaşar Yakış. Minister, happy to be able to have you on today.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you for inviting me.
It's our absolute pleasure. We're lucky to be able to have you on. Now, Minister, let's start with a little bit of background here. In the early 2000s, as AKP came to power, they viewed Saudi Arabia as an ally until the early 2010s, where the relations soured when both states found themselves on the opposite sides of the fence on many issues, particularly the Arab Spring. The relations between both states had been perpetually deteriorating until very recently. So in your own words, could you give us a little background on what happened in the last decade that made Turkey and Saudi Arabia sworn enemies? Your thoughts?
I think the turning point in this Turkey-Saudi relations was Turkey's new approach to the Middle Eastern countries, that's to say, to become a party to the conflicts among the or between the Arab countries. Turkey traditionally tried to keep away from the inter-Arab affairs. This was also in line with the century-old principle of Turkey when Mustafa Kemal Atatürk invited the Undersecretary of State of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Numan Menemencoğlu, in 1934, and he gave him a set of advices, pieces of advice, and this included not to get involved in the inter-Arab affairs, and don't give advice to Arab countries unless they ask you an advice. Turkey followed this advice, and there were also other advices regarding the Russia, for instance. He also advised the Undersecretary that Turkey should not provoke the Soviet Union at that time, and try to watch the relations with the Turkic-speaking countries within the Soviet Union, and with the Western countries, is that try to maintain good relations with the European countries, but don't become a tool of their imperialistic designs. So these were the advice. Regarding the Arab countries, Turkey maintained these pieces of advice very pertinently for decades. And it was thanks to this that Turkey was able to maintain equidistant relations with all Arab countries and also with Israel. And it obtained the important role of playing mediation by becoming equidistant to Arab countries and also to Israel. Turkey has maintained this, but after the Arab Spring, especially Arab, actually, it also coincided with Turkey's changing policy in the world at large. I mean, in the international relations at large. Between the foundation of the party and the foundation of the Turkish AK Party's government in 2002 and 3, Turkey tried to maintain good relations with all countries, and up to 2007, 8, 2009, it maintained these relations properly. But from the 2010 and 2011 onward, it got out of control, and Turkey got involved unnecessarily on the wrong side of history, especially as a result of the Arab Spring. In the Arab Spring, Turkey used a sectarian approach, and also religious approach, if you may say so. When the Arab Spring broke out in Tunisia in end of 2010 and 11, beginning of 11, at that time, AKP party had a sort of relations with the Arab countries. AKP party has religious affinities with the Muslim Brotherhood movement. The Arab Spring broke out in Tunisia, and at that time, Rashid Ghannouchi was the leader of Muslim Brotherhood in Tunisia. He said at that time that when there were fears in the international community that Tunisia may opt for fundamentalism, in order to calm down or to dispel the worries of the international community, Rashid Ghannouchi said that when we come to power, we are going to avoid three things. One, we are not going to impose Sharia in Tunisia. Second, we are not going to ban alcohol in the restaurants, and we are not going to force ladies to wear scarf. And he continues by saying that Tunisia will be inspired by the moderate Islam as it is practiced in Turkey.
I see.
So at that time, Tunisia was taking Turkey's example as a guidance. Later on, of course, it turned the other way, and we had to perhaps be inspired from the Tunisian practice. Then the Arab Spring spread to other countries, to Egypt later on, then to Libya, then to Syria. At that time, the decision makers in the AKP party in Turkey thought that now there is a trend in the northern African countries, beginning from Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and Syria. And since the AKP is also inspired, has ideological affinity with the Muslim Brotherhood. When Muslim Brotherhood was established in 1928, Hassan al-Banna thought that he believed in democracy, and he thought that the source of votes in a democracy is in the outskirts of big agglomerations such as Cairo and Alexandria in Egypt. Turkey was inspired from this and looked at the outskirts of the big agglomerations and also rural areas where voters could be satisfied with a small gesture by sending them some sugar, some flour, and or facilitating their job in the hospital, etc., with small things that you can gain their vote. So he looked at the outskirts of the big agglomerations and the rural area as the source of votes. In Turkey, the ancestor parties of the AKP, Erbakan's parties, used this method, and it gained weight in the outskirts of Istanbul, and this is how the Erbakan's party came to power. So AKP has an ideological affinity from the ancestor parties. And Turkey thought, AKP thought that now that Muslim Brotherhood is overwhelming in this belt of countries, starting from Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and Syria, Turkey could lead this country and become their leaders. So this is how Turkey sided on the wrong side, perhaps, or not the wrong side, it's not the proper word, but it acted on the basis of sectarian approach to the question because of the Muslim Brotherhood. So this is how Turkey became a party in the Middle Eastern countries against the countries that were governed or were to be governed by the Muslim Brotherhood ideology and the others. So the separation with the Saudi Arabia came at that moment, because despite the fact that the origins of the Muslim Brotherhood is Saudi Arabia, it was organized in Egypt, but the idea of Muslim Brotherhood was born in the Ottoman times in Saudi Arabia. So Muslim Brotherhood was born there. But the present Saudi leaders did not like the Muslim Brotherhood because Muslim Brotherhood brought democracy, wanted to gain power through democracy. And since Muslim Brotherhood has strong roots in Saudi Arabia did not like to be inspired by the Muslim Brotherhood, and it acted against it. So the divergence between Turkey and Saudi Arabia comes from Turkey's attitude to side with the Muslim Brotherhood and Saudi Arabia not liking the Muslim Brotherhood, because if democracy prevails in many Middle Eastern countries, then the monarchies will be threatened. So it was a long explanation. But this is how it evolved, and Turkey and Saudi Arabia found themselves on different part of the contention or of the ideology.
Fair enough. So if I did understand that correct, there was an ideological battle between Turkey and Saudi Arabia where the Saudi princes and the kings, really the royalty, found themselves in an existential threat where the Muslim Brotherhood threatened their power through potential introduction of democracy, and AKP thought that they could utilize the Muslim Brotherhood and expand their influences in the Middle East by becoming sort of a de facto leader of this organization, if I understood that correct. And Minister, I'd like to move on. We're a little tight on time. And President Erdoğan had been making attempts to shake his image as a regional threat and rather rebrand Turkey as a peacemaker since late last year. Turkey has so far had been trying to make up with Israel, UAE, Egypt, and famously is still playing intermediary between Russia and Ukraine. Now, we've known for some time that Turkey had been trying to mend relations with Saudi Arabia as well. And I don't think it's much of a speculation at this point that Turkey closed the Jamal Khashoggi case as a prerequisite for this mending. Now, it looks like the Saudis got what they wanted out of Turkey, or at least one of the things that they wanted out of Turkey. But what does Turkey want out of Saudi Arabia? Your thoughts?
I think there are two things. One, Turkey, after having made the wrong choices for several years, it felt the need to improve the relations with the countries of the region, because it came to the bottom of the relations. Of course, since you cannot think further down, it had to go up, and it started to mend relations with the countries of the region, starting with Egypt. But in Egypt, of course, the Egyptians, after having perhaps rebuffed by Turkey in the Sisi military coup, and Turkey was right at the beginning to break the relations or to criticize a military coup in Egypt, which is normal because every country, all democratic countries, blamed the military coup in Egypt. But the rule in the international relations is that when the team who organizes a military coup in a country establishes its authority, then the countries do not remain indifferent or do not keep the relations cut forever. After a certain while, when the authority is established and the mechanisms start to turn to continue, then you establish relations with this country sooner or later. This is what the International Committee has done for Egypt. Only Turkey continued to admit Mohammed Mursi, who was in jail, to regard him as the legitimate head of state. And Turkey said that he will never be on the same boat with Sisi, who overthrew the government. And when in the United States, in the United Nations General Assembly meeting, Erdoğan was also invited there. There was a dinner organized by the United States at that time, and Erdoğan refused to attend the dinner because Sisi was at the dinner table. To that extent, but later on, Turkey understood that there is more advantage in Turkey in improving the relations with Egypt rather than keeping them cut. This time, of course, Egypt started to be reluctant or to drag feet in improving relations with Turkey. I think it is still dragging its feet towards Turkey. And it started by forcing Turkey to get rid of the Muslim Brotherhood members, activists in Istanbul, who had their broadcasting channels, I think, and they were allowed to carry out their activities. And Turkey had to admit later on to get rid of them. Egypt wanted the activists of the Muslim Brotherhood to be extradited to Egypt, but later on I understand that it was agreed to extradite them to a third country. It may be Qatar or another country, we do not know. So this is how Turkey is trying to abide by the conditions put forward by Egypt. Same thing with the United Arab Emirates, and now with Saudi Arabia. So it came as part of big deal with all countries of the Middle East to improve relations, to mend fences and improve relations. This is how it started. And the question of the Khashoggi murder was, of course, very important in the relations or in deterioration of the relations between Turkey and Saudi Arabia. And I understand that the Turkish government decided to turn the page, a blank page in the relations, and agreed to go there, to visit Saudi Arabia, and to send the file of the Khashoggi affairs to the Saudis and forget about the bad relations or strained relations. When we consider relations between the countries, of course, countries have to act according to their interest. You cannot be enemies indefinitely with a country, or you cannot be always good friend with a country. It depends upon the conditions. And now Turkey decided to mend relations with Saudi Arabia, which is a right decision, turn the page. But of course, what Turkey shouldn't have done at the beginning was to use this language, attacking directly the rulers or the most important people in Saudi Arabia. There is another set of things that Turkey should have done in Istanbul when Khashoggi was murdered, and that it did not do. It could have, for instance, arrested the people who were involved without letting them, before letting them leave the country. As you may remember, it was known, it was verified that the murder was committed. Turkey was able to confirm the murder at about 5:45 in the evening. But the plane which was going to take those people who were involved were to leave at 6 o'clock. So it did not use this 15 minutes to prevent the murderers from leaving the country. And even there was another plane that left at 11 o'clock in the night. It left Istanbul at 11 o'clock. And when it was somewhere in Polatlı, the Turkish authorities ordered the plane not to continue its way. After a while, after having discussed the question, they let the plane continue to Saudi Arabia. So there were certain things that Turkey should have done when the murder was committed. It did not do. There were other things that Turkey shouldn't have done. That's to say, to blame the responsibles of the country in such an emphatic way, and that Turkey has done it.
I see.
There were other things that Turkey could have done on the Khashoggi affairs. For instance, Turkey could have entered the building, the consulate, because in the consulate, according to the 1963 Convention on the Consular Relations, it is the archives of the consulate which is immune. The immunity is for the archives. So you can enter the building without touching the archives. So we presume that the murder was not committed in the archives. It must have been committed somewhere else in the building. So Turkey should have entered the building and arrested people as soon as it knew that there was something wrong.
Well, what you're saying is that they actively chose not to.
Yeah. Please, yeah.
What you're saying is that Turkey actively chose not to interfere in this particular murder, but did leak the sound recordings, several days later, the affair into the press. So what you're saying that Turkey could have acted in the time, but chose not to, and I think you're allocating that to a strategic type of thinking, like Turkey meant to do that.
It's correct, yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I see. And Foreign Minister, I'm sorry, we're a little bit tight on time today. So we're going to bid farewell for just today. But we'd like to thank you very much for coming on and like to have you back on in the future. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And in politics, ladies and gentlemen, last week we covered a potential rift in the AKP, but we didn't think a potential rift in the opposition would come so quickly. Now, just to be clear, there isn't anything official for the opposition coalition. So far, opposition coalition is fully intact, officially. Except Deva Party chair and former foreign minister under AKP, Ali Babacan, dropped a bombshell in his party's weekly group meeting on Wednesday and said that Deva will enter the 2023 elections under its own banner. And it wasn't just a slip of the tongue either. Babacan tweeted about it after, and speculations ran wild. Was the opposition coalition breaking up? After all, Felicity Party chair Temel Karamollaoğlu had floated the idea of a third coalition 2 weeks ago. So with the new election bill in effect, everyone had been speculating if this was the end of coalitions in Turkey. Would the parties have to compete with AKP without any backup? Because after 20 years, AKP has been slowly losing votes, yes, but still commands the highest vote percentage of any party, between 25 and 30%. However, the short answer is no, it doesn't appear that the coalition is breaking up. Deva clarified after that they were still behind the coalition's core platform, but how could Deva be running independently and still be in the coalition? The long answer is Turkish election laws are complicated. But we have a clip of Medyascope editor-in-chief Rushan Çakır explaining how Deva is both running on its own and might still very much be in the coalition. Let's go to that story.
On Wednesday, Deva Party chair Ali Babacan spoke at his party's weekly group meeting and said, "The Democracy and Progress Party has decided to enter the upcoming election under its own name, with its own glory, and with its own logo." Babacan later went on to share the statement on Twitter. He went on to say, however, that the opposition coalition would continue to gain strength and said, "We will stand behind the promises we made." Sadullah Ergin, chairman of Deva Party Organization Affairs and former Minister of Justice, spoke to Medyascope and clarified, "We will not run in the election under another party's banner or joint list. We can run in the election on our own, or we can run under a coalition. The fact that we have decided to run under our own banner doesn't mean we are breaking away from the coalition." Erdoğan said that there was mass confusion in the local party affiliates after the new election bill and that the statement was made to clarify what was possible under the new law. Erdoğan reiterated that the party stands behind all of its promises it had made to the coalition and stated, "We stand behind our commitments to return to a parliamentary system and to nominate a joint presidential candidate from the coalition."
Now, it doesn't mean that just because a party is running for the election under its own name and its own banner, doesn't mean that they are running in the election on their own. In the current coalition law, parties can run both under their own banner and still be included in a coalition. It was like this in the last election. It's a complicated system. The latest election law made it even more complicated, however. Whether it is the ruling coalition, or the opposition coalition, or a potential third coalition. Like how there's a talk of a potential coalition led by HDP, it's going to be the same. For instance, the Workers' Party is considering entering the race under their own banner. Labour Party will probably do the same. So, in the end, Deva Party had to make a statement and clarify that this doesn't mean that they are leaving the coalition. They said that they are entering the race under their own banner, but they are still undecided on the coalition. Of course, there's a second matter here. That was concerning the MP elections. Another thing is, who are they going to nominate for the presidential race? For instance, is the Deva Party going to nominate its own candidate? As far as I understand, this is not on the table. In the MP elections, they are going to run their own candidate. But in the presidential election, they will probably, and I'm saying probably, this is not 100% certain, they will probably run a candidate with the opposition coalition. In the MP elections, they might run their own candidates or candidates from a third coalition made up of parties inside the opposition coalition. But in the presidential run, they will probably, and we're still talking about probabilities here, they will probably back a candidate from the opposition coalition.
And in the economy, the central bank nearly doubles its year-end inflation by 19.6% to 42.8%. According to data from the Government Statistical Institute, inflation topped 61% in March, and we're still waiting on numbers from April due to be released next week. But if the trend continues, there's really no reason for it not to. It will likely increase. So the year-end projection of 40-odd% might very much be wishful thinking on the central bank's part. Now, of course, these are numbers from the government, which many take with a grain of salt. The independent inflation research group, ENAC, had reported numbers at over 140% earlier this month, so no wonder central banks' projections are up. In related news, amidst the sky-high inflation rates seen in Turkey, there was talk of a new 500 lira banknote going into circulation, but the central bank says there is absolutely no need for it. But as inflation goes up, of course, youth unemployment is not too far behind. According to the research by the Istanbul municipal government, over 65% of young workers have been unemployed and looking for work for over 1 year. Let's go to those details.
The central bank published the second inflation report of 2022. During the presentation at the inflation report information meeting, Central Bank Chairman Shahab Kavcıoğlu announced that the year-end inflation forecast for 2022 was increased by 19.6 points to 42.8%, and the food inflation forecast was increased by 24.8 points to 49%. According to the data of the Turkish Statistical Institute, annual inflation was 61.14% and food inflation was 70.33% in March. Answering if the bank would be minting a new 500 lira banknote as a result of the high inflation, Kavcıoğlu said, "We are not prepared to do anything like that, neither is the market. That would mean the official recognition of the inflation rates. 500 lira banknotes would break down a psychological barrier. It wouldn't be long until things escalate from there." According to the Metropole polling company, over 50% of all Turks have begun skipping meals amidst the economic downturn, and over 60% have stopped driving entirely due to the sky-high gas prices. On the employment market side, things are grim still, and multiple agencies release conflicting information yet again. According to the Turkish Statistical Institute, unemployment stands at 10.7%, with 3.5 million people currently unemployed. However, DİSK, one of Turkey's 4 major trade unions, puts the number at more than double, nearly 8 million people out of work. In youth unemployment, according to the Istanbul Municipality Planning Agency, 34% of young workers with a college degree have been looking for work for 1 year, whereas over 65% have been looking for work for over a year.
And with that, that's it for us in This Week in Turkey. I have been Murat Türsan, and I am off next week on account of holidays, but I will see you the week after. And thank you for joining us.
Türkiye'nin sivil, bağımsız, özgür ve çoğulcu bir medya ortamına ihtiyacı var. Medyascope, 20 Ağustos 2015'te bu ihtiyacı karşılamak üzere yola çıktı. Ama yolumuz uzun. Bu yolculukta bize Patreon veya YouTube'un katıl butonu üzerinden katkıda bulunabilirsiniz. Destek verin, sizinle güçlenelim.